Page 1. The Quiet Hours. The town of Ashgrove did not appear on most maps. When it did, it sat in the crease between two pages, so that the paper always folded across it like a closing lid. Mara Havel drove in on a road that seemed embarrassed by its own existence, a ribbon of patched asphalt winding between black spruces and granite the color of old teeth. She had come for a job, to catalogue the library at the defunct hydroelectric station, a concrete hulk perched above a chasm where the river once hammered itself thin. The foundation that owned the site wanted the archives inventoried before the building was renovated into a museum. No one mentioned why the renovation kept being delayed. Her first night in the boarding house, the landlady slid a brass key and a stapled packet across the counter. Quiet Hours, the cover read in mimeographed blue. Beneath, in the tidy clerkish hand, no whistling after dusk. Curtains drawn by 9, lamps on low. No names allowed from midnight to 4. Traditions, the landlady said when Mara raised an eyebrow, the kind that keep neighbors friendly. Mara smiled and carried the rules upstairs with her suitcase. She grew up in cities where sirens braided themselves through the night air. She had always secretly craved a quieter place. Through the thin wall she could hear the boarding house's other tenant pacing slow, deliberate steps, a metronome of footfalls, then a pause, then a whisper, too soft to catch. Mara unpacked slowly and looked at the packet again. On the last page, a blank line waited above the tidy hand's final instruction: sign to acknowledge. Sign with your used name. Leave your true one unwritten. She laughed and didn't sign. The lamp hummed quietly. Outside, the trees massed like a congregation. Ashgrove was very, very still. Page 2. The map that wasn't the hydro station's library occupied a square room whose windows were painted shut. Dust furred the radiators, maps covered every wall, topographic, political, surveyor's charts with pencil scars, layers of contour lines like fingerprints. In the center stood a drafting table with a leather blotter deeply grooved by knives. Mara opened the first ledger. Intake log, 1931 to 1938. Names of workers, serial numbers for tools, a column titled Losses. Alongside missing wrenches and coils of wire, someone had entered words: Echo, Light, Peggy, Adams singing, Tuesday nights. She ran her finger down the list and told herself it was a joke. People leave graffiti everywhere joy can go to die. Footsteps approached. The station's caretaker, a man called Orrin, appeared in the doorway without knocking. He had the permanent squint of someone who spent too much time looking into wind. "Keep the lamps on," he said, "even in daylight. Some corners keep their own weather." "I have good eyes," Mara replied more sharply than she meant to. "Not about seeing." He set a tin lunch pail on the table. "About being seen." After he left, Mara bent over a wall map titled Ashgrove, 1902. She searched for the boarding house. It wasn't marked. The roads refused her memory, branching where they shouldn't and shrinking where they shouldn't. The river, bold and braiding, stopped at the dam site like a severed artery. In faint pencil at the margin, a note: Cartography fails where sound does. The cuff of her sweater brushed an eraser crumb, and the town's name smeared into a blur she could not wipe clean. She turned both lamps to their lowest setting. The room seemed to lean, as if listening. Page 3. Tuesday. Quiet hours aren't superstition, the landlady said at breakfast, cutting her toast into 4 exact squares. They are a schedule. She tapped the packet with a butter knife. "You'll feel the hush come down like weather, and then you'll know." "When?" Mara asked, amused in spite of herself. "Different each day, but on Tuesdays, never later than 10. It was Tuesday. Mara walked to the station at dusk with a thermos and a stiff confidence that felt like armor. The air tasted of wet stone. A flock of starlings moved like a single thought above the bridge. In the library, she put the lamps on low and began cataloging. Ledger, ledger, map. She made tidy notes, a bulwark of ink against the building's unhelpful personality. At 9:41, the clock on the wall stuttered and stopped. It wasn't silence that followed, but the idea of it, a subtraction so profound it braided the loose threads of noise into one long absence. The lamp's hum was gone. The building's settling creaks, gone. Even the river below, which had always provided a patient rustle from the chasm, unspooled to nothing. The air pressed inward as if the room were a bell jar and a hand had formed a seal around it. Mara held her breath without meaning to. The hair on her arms rose. A page turned in the ledger, though her hand hovered inches away. In that manipulated quiet, the sound was indecently loud. Woof, like a small animal rolling over in its sleep. She whispered her own name to steady herself. Something in the corner whispered it back, nearly right. Page 4. The former names. The next morning, Orrin waited at the bottom of the boarding-house steps with a paper bag. "You need a whistle," he said, handing her a tin pea whistle on a cord. Not to blow, to hold. Mara slipped the cord over her head. "This is quaint," she said, "but last night was a power surge, or old wiring, or my nerves." Orrin looked past her toward the upstairs window. "Surges don't repeat millwork." At the station she examined the corner that had said her name. It contained nothing but a coat rack. 4 hooks were occupied by empty tags, thin metal blanks that would have once carried names. She lifted one. It was cold enough to sting. On the wall beside the rack, words had been gouged with a knife, most of them crossed out until the plaster showed through. Of the remaining, she could read only 3. My former names. The whistle was absurd against her chest, but its small weight steadied her. She returned to the ledgers. Men signed with stuttering hands, with a echos for signatures, with other people's names. Twice she saw her own last name in the column of losses. Havel, Havel. Across the page, in the tidy clerkish hand that had written the quiet hours, found again, found, then thinner. By dusk, the hush drew down. Mara didn't flinch this time. She set her pen carefully in the blotter groove. "Hello?" she said to the room, and felt foolish. Something rustled behind the coat rack. 4 empty tags clinked softly together. Then came a second sound, intimate and wrong. A swallow, like a throat, remembering how to move. A voice shaped itself carefully around the consonants. Havel. It was not a person's voice. It sounded like old paper dragged over teeth. She took a step back, and her boot nudged the whistle. It chimed against the button of her coat, and the knot voice fell silent. Page 5. The house with no eaves. Mara began walking the town at midday, when the air lay slack and ordinary. Ashgrove was a sketch of buildings, boarding house, shuttered diner, a church with a boarded eye where the rose window ought to be. The houses had roofs pitched steeply against winter, and no eaves to catch the whisper of rain. Names were missing from everything. Streets called first, second, third. The church labeled only CH, where letters had fallen away. She paused at a fence made of drifted metal signs. A hand-painted placard hung among them, frail and furious. Stop saying it. Beneath, smaller. You make the hole bigger. Mara used the payphone by the diner to call her sister Aylin, 3 states away. The connection hissed. "Just checking in," Mara said, and felt an unexpected relief when Aylin spoke her name like a bell. "You sound tired," Aylin said. "You get that job done and come home." "I'm fine." She looked at the glass booth door. Someone had glued strips of felt along its edges, as if to prevent rattling. "Do you believe places can refuse being mapped?" Aylin laughed. "Places? Sure, people too. Some things are better without a shape." When Mara hung up, she noticed the phone's number plate had been pried off, leaving an oval of adhesive and a suggestion of digits like ghost teeth. On impulse, she lifted the receiver again and dialed her own number from memory, just to reassure herself it still existed. When the line picked up, someone who knew how she breathed but not how she spoke waited at the other end. She put the receiver down very gently. The hush of daylight seemed suddenly too thin to stand on.
Page 6. Oren's story. "Thoughtful names are teeth," Oren said that evening, leaning against the library doorframe. He held a coil of wire as if it were a talisman. "They chew the world into pieces we can swallow." "This town has some very colorful folklore," Mara said. "Folklore is what we tell outsiders so we can say we warned them." He dropped his voice. "The dam took the river's sound. We thought silence would mean peace, but the world doesn't like missing parts. Something came for its balance. We call them listeners because they learn from what we leak. They wear our offcuts, echoes, nicknames, wrong names whispered in anger, the ones on tags that fall off. They can't make names. They can only thin them." Surprised. "Thin them?" "Stretch them till they're lace. Beautiful, useless." He watched the lamps with dislike. "There used to be a woman here, Mrs. Ames. She lost the word for child. She could point and cry and say, 'mine,' but the good word had no weight left in it, so no one acted. The baby drowned before we understood." Mara set her jaw against a shiver. Annoyed. "Your stories are cruel." "They're true enough to behave." He touched the whistle that hung against her chest. "Metal, not breath." "Curious. What happens if you whistle?" "They hear you as an instrument, not a mouth." He straightened. "Keep your voice when the quiet comes. Speak as little as you can, like you're hiding a candle in wind." When he left, Mara opened the 1902 map again. She pressed her thumb to the paper where Ashgrove should be, and felt only the flat fiction of ink. The town pressed back from the other side. Page 7. The Archive and the Child. The quiet fell earlier, as if it had overheard them planning. Mara set her pen down and didn't reach for it again. A ledger on the desk flipped itself closed with pleased finality. On the shelf behind her, a cardboard file box as its lid lifted. Inside lay photographs. Men with lunch pails, boys standing hip to hip on the unfinished dam, a girl squinting at the camera with the assured frown of an only child. Mara lifted the girl's photograph carefully. On the back, in faded ink, Peggy A. Tuesday Child. A draft slid along the floor. The air tasted of wet pennies. Somewhere in the walls the sound of a far-off radio stuttered alive and died. Mara realized with a jolt that the lamps were still on, but the light they produced had stopped behaving like light. It held shape, puddled in corners, and didn't reach the places it should. Page 8. The Exaction. She did not sleep. She lay fully clothed on the bed and watched the curtains breathe as if a slow animal stood behind them. At some hour beyond sense, the pacing steps in the next room resumed. Pause. 3 beats. Pause. Then a whisper, nearer than the wall could account for. Mar. She had never been Mar to anyone. The almost name wormed under her ribs. She sat up and the mattress gave a tiny squeal. The sound felt like a confession. When she opened her door, the corridor was a paper throat. She walked to the other tenant's door and pressed her ear to it. A sound like pages turning, a sound like someone trying to remember a song. "Who are you?" she asked the seam of the door. On the floor, the quiet pooled like shadow. It flowed toward her boots. She took 2 steps back. The door opened a degree without a human hand and let out the smell of river stones. No one stood inside. The wallpaper pattern was a field of little mouths. The whistle was in her pocket. She held it, cold and round. She did not put it to her lips. Downstairs, the landlady sat at the kitchen table with a cup she was not drinking from. "Don't chase it," she said. "They stay thin as long as you do. The minute you try to give them edges, they pay you back." "What do they want?" The landlady smoothed the quiet hours packet with both palms. "Tithes. We used to give them names of things we could stand to lose. Tuesdays, the sound a spoon makes against a glass, the word for the color between blue and green. But folks got greedy. They started paying with other people's words. Gossip thins a town faster than drought." Mara sat because her knees insisted. "What happens if they take too much?" The landlady looked very tired. "Then the map folds, and we live under the crease." Page 9. The river that wasn't there. Morning's noise returned reluctantly. Birds that sounded like imitations of birds, a truck that coughed up the hill like an actor playing sick. Mara went to the dam. The spillway gaped over the gorge like a pulled tooth. She climbed the staircase to the catwalk and looked down into the chasm where the river should have been white as unraveling rope. What lay below was not water but a surface like polished graphite, perfectly still. When a breeze came, the surface did not ruffle. The wind walked away with nothing to show for it. Oren met her on the catwalk, crimson scarf wrapped tight. "You see it now." "I see absence pretending to be a thing." "Absence is a patient carpenter," he said. "It will fit itself where it can." She turned the whistle in her fingers. "If names are teeth, what do we bite? Whatever tries to take your mouth away." Dusk pushed its thumb onto the day. Mara went back to the library. She took the photograph. Page 10. The Crease. They left Ashgrove on a Thursday that felt like a page-turning. Oren drove the foundation truck. The landlady sat in the middle, the packet of quiet hours in her lap, folded into a narrow blade. Mara rode by the window, watching the spruces pass like a dark choir. The road out was straighter than the one in. It always is. Halfway to the state line, the truck slowed. Ahead, a crowd stood in the road, their faces dull as coins. They were not people. They wore people the way a field wears snow, a texture that belonged to something underneath. Their mouths moved carefully, trying to gather the vowels. A small shape stood among them, a girl with her hair in a ribbon, frowning as if the light were too bright. Peggy A. lifted her hand in a motion halfway between a wave and a warning. Mara raised the whistle and did not blow it. She held it like a tooth. The crowd parted. They did not want to fight. They wanted a tithe. The landlady unfolded the packet. On the blank line she wrote in the careful clerkish hand Mara had learned to distrust, "Ashgrove." The paper drank the ink greedily. The landlady tore the sheet along its staple and held it out through the window. The girl stepped forward and took it. "Is that wise?" Orrin whispered. "It's the only thing left that belongs to all of us," the landlady said. "They can keep the name, we'll keep the place." The crowd melted away like snow from dark stone. The girl did not vanish. She climbed into the truck bed and lay down with her hands folded, as if for a nap. Her ribbon fluttered in wind that did not move the trees. No one spoke her name. The map inside Mara's head loosened a notch, like a jaw unclenching. When they reached the state line, the road signs grew chatty again. Welcome, speed limit, scenic overlook. Mara tasted the lost almost word as a scar tastes rain, ache without content. She thought of Aylin, who would ask what good any of it had done. She pictured a town that would not be called and therefore would not be taken, a river that would be rebuilt out of sound, school bells, saws humming, prayers said under breath, the dry laugh of men on break, a library where lamps stayed thin and where photographs held still. In a motel 2 hours away, she phoned her sister. "It's me," she said, careful as a surgeon. "I'll be home soon." "What happened there?" "Nothing with a clean name." She hesitated. "But I brought you something." She touched the whistle through her shirt, felt its round coldness. "A souvenir," she lied. That night, Mara dreamed